I got to start out with telling, like, I was 13 and I felt like something is horribly wrong. Something. And I did not really know what it was. And I was starting to try to find out what's going on. And I read kind of everything I could get my hands on, like history and psychology and philosophy and everything. And it slowly, I got to understand it's about meaning. It's about truth. It's about what is the fundamentals of reality. So in a way, I ended up in spirituality, and in my case, Buddhism, because that was like the closest to something scientifically, which suited me very well, because like belief systems is kind of the last thing I'm interested in. I wanted to know. So, and there you are now, and in my eyes and my understanding, you are a scientist because your approach is scientific, and you got like 2 PhDs, you got 1 PhD in philosophy, but not just like everything or anything, but philosophy of mind. And you got a PhD in computer engineering, and you were into artificial intelligence.
That's correct.
So, and it's kind of crazy. You work for CERN, European Organization for Nuclear Research. And I don't know what you did there, but you are kind of like the serious guy. You're not some, I don't know, spiritual, I sit on a cloud, whatever, and make up things, because I know you published so many papers. I mean, wrote so many books. And and now here I am, like lost in the spiritual realm. So like in the view of the world, and there you are, and fighting and struggling still, of course, for being recognized, your work being recognized, and the truth being recognized. And you have such a wonderful gift to, like to me, like Immanuel Kant, I mean, so complex.
Thank you.
So
what
complex.
A big comparison.
Well, it's such a big picture you're painting there, and in what come to me couldn't do, you do. You are able to put it in simple terms. You make it readable and understandable, and you produce tons of great examples.
The truth is simple, and to get there, we just have to cut through the nonsense. And nonsense can be more or less easily seen for what it is. Nonsense, bullshit. And if you cut through the bullshit, what is left is pretty simple. It's not nuanced. It doesn't require high IQ. It's that within which we are immersed all the time. We just have to be a little bit more critical of our own little stories, which we inherit by culture, and in which tell us what the world is supposed to be, as opposed to what it actually is.
Yeah, and that finally is just like beliefs.
Belief is something that we construct conceptually. So we weave a conceptual narrative in our minds, and then we make a decision: is this plausible or not? Should I buy into it or not? Truth is what you are left with when you realize that your narratives lead to impossible conclusions, or to implications that are at least implausible. So in a sense, a 5-year-old kid lives in truth. But once we get educated and start speaking a language and interacting with teachers, doctors, parents, and the news anchor at the 8 o'clock news, then it all goes to hell, and we start living in a world of abstraction that we construct ourselves.
Absolutely. And I didn't notice at the beginning. So like, as I said, when I started out trying to discover like what I just felt, that there is something, it's to me like the whole world was like lost in some weird dream. And I felt like, okay, just zombies around me. And I couldn't pinpoint it, what I felt, what I knew. And 20 years later, what they say in Buddhism, I woke up. And it was a long 20 years, and I had so many enlightenment experiences, and then I got lost in those and had to get out of them, and to finally come to an almost impossible simplicity. It's really like this, oh, it was always there. Yeah. It's just like, it's just that. It's so simple. And we are really blinded by our, as you just mentioned, by what we learned, or the filters of how we interpret the world and things.
It's very difficult to communicate that to people, because people expect that the way to truth has to go through an enormous dark forest of complexity, and that you need to be a special human being or a particularly smart human being to find your way through that maze, and then at the other end that you can't even fathom, you can't even conceive of, there will be a pot of gold, and that's the truth. I'm afraid it's not how it is. You just have to cut through not cut through, abandon the complexity. Things are not complex. Getting closer to truth is about what you abandon, what you let drop from your conceptual narratives.
Yes.
The concepts that we postulate and take to be real, they aren't. They are just mental abstractions. And if we see them for what they are, then we have now the intellectual authority to decide and abandon them, because they are not leading us anywhere. They arrive at points that are self-contradictory or absurd. And then you just backtrack, step back, drop more conceptual armor, and step again back. Yes. What you're left with is what is going on and has always been going on from the beginning of time.
Yes, yes. That was always there. And then you create a mass of destruction, like distracting, yeah? And you get lost in this narrative and in this confusion and this, it seems like it is a puzzle to solve. Yeah. But it never was a puzzle. There is nothing to solve. So by trying to solve a puzzle that doesn't need to be solved, you get lost.
Of course,
it's
because
like trying to get out of a cell by pushing against the door even harder, and you just have to pull it. It's open already.
And it's very difficult to communicate this to people. We live in a culture that is so lost in abstraction that this message doesn't get through. I wonder, I don't know your audience, but I wonder what percentage of them will actually grasp the simplicity of what we just said. But yeah, okay, it's part of the process.
It's part of the process. And obviously they are aware of something, they feel something. It can be, of course, that they're just dealing with suffering and them just trying to evade it somehow, and maybe even using spirituality as a compensation. So not really trying to wake up and understand something, but just have something to cling to. I'm on the path. I'm connected with something important. But of course, I mean, my audience usually are those who were on the path for decades and tried everything, and then finally are ready to give up all those stories and all those rituals and all those hoping for, and they're ready to deal with simplicity, being here and now, and just see what happens if you abandon everything. And you have to be ready for this. And I was, after 20 years, this is how it worked. I worked so hard. I meditated for months and years. And one day I was too tired to continue this spiritual search. I was too tired, and I sat there and I kind of just gazed. And there was, for the very first time in my life, there was no wanting in it. No, nobody wanted anything, and there was just the beingness of what of the isness. And then it's just like the first one, that cannot be. It's way too simple.
You know, I can relate more or less to your story, although not completely, because I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not an enlightened being by any stretch of the imagination, at least not what I understand by the word enlightened. Seems something very positive that solves all of your problems. Well, if that is the case, then I am not enlightened, if you know what I mean. I still have lots of problems. I still suffer. I still have anxiety. But certain things in my life have become simpler. For instance, meaning is no longer a thing to be fought for. And I'm immersed in meaning. It doesn't matter what I do. My life is meaningful. There is no other way it can possibly be. By the mere act of being alive, meaning surrounds me. I'm breathing it. So that desperate search for meaning that you see a lot in Western culture, because of the nihilistic materialist narrative that basically sucks meaning out of life, and people buy into that conceptual narrative. So they feel the story they tell themselves, and that story tells them that there is no meaning. And then, of course, they feel a gaping hole in their chest somewhere around here. There is that black hole, that empty space that, you know, gravitationally trying to pull something into it. Well, that's a construct of narratives. So at least that part I don't struggle with anymore. I don't struggle with meaning. If I drop that immediately after our conversation, my life will have been meaningful.
Yes.
Know what I mean? I'm not anymore in that desperate search for the validation of my existence. That has dropped. That's gone. But as you said in the beginning, you know, all roads lead to Rome ultimately, but I didn't get here through a spiritual path. I got here through, the meditation of rational reasoning and empirical evidence.
But you said there's something I'm really curious to explore a little deeper, because I, of course, too had ideas about what enlightenment got to be. Well, enlightenment must be something like a state that is a state for a being, or let's say, I mean, there is no being. There is just like a gestalt, or I cannot find words for what it is, but it's not an entity. And enlightenment is just some modulation of the expression of this form. And this too must be simple, because the awakening of the individual, the awakening itself, is just a realization of how simple everything is, or that like the substance of everything is one, and everything that appears is that substance. So like the waves are the ocean, and the ocean are the waves, and the form of the waves are ocean as well, and there is no separation. And so to me, enlightenment has nothing to do with end of pain, or end of breathing, or end of hair growing. It's just like this life. But it's the end of the confusion that I am an entity, a body, or some material subjectivity that is opposed to the world of objects. And I'm in space and time, because to me, there is no space and time. And it's kind of not just a waking up to the simplicity.
Yeah.
So
there you go. If characterized this way, you probably can be enlightened through reason and evidence, because there is a way to arrive at this exact conclusion in a very robust way that leaves very little option on the table, other than to realize that what's going on is exactly what you said. There is only one thing going on. That thing has multiple configurations or patterns of excitation. And because of this variety of patterns of excitation, we see multiplicity. But underlying the multiplicity, there is only that one thing. It's like ripples on a lake. A lake can ripple in a million different ways, depending on the wind, depending on atmospheric conditions. But what is a ripple but the lake in movement? There is only the lake. There is ever only the lake. There's nothing to ripples or whirlpool other than the lake. But of course, there is variety in the ripples, variety in the whirlpools. And we sort of, by experiencing that variety, which exists, that variety as experiences, of course, exists. Nobody's denying the obvious here. But we attach a story to it. We attach a narrative that complicates things unnecessarily, like the notion that although mentality is all I can know because I'm cooped up in my mind, if whatever is not in my mind might as well not exist as far as I am concerned. So although all we know by direct acquaintance is mentation or mentality or mental processes, we try to account for the fact that we seem to share a world. We try to account for it by saying, well, there is a world up there. Granted, there is a world up there. And then we say, and it's not mental. Now, it's the next step where everything goes downhill because it leads us down a path that faces so many problems. And then each time a problem is faced, we complicate the narrative a little more to try to get around that problem. It's like Ptolemaic astronomy. Every time you see an aberration, you add a circle, and then circles on top of circles on top of circles. And then at some point, you are immersed in so much complexity that you think, well, the nature of life and reality must be extraordinarily complex. No, it's not. That complexity arose out of a silly attempt to fix a story that could never work.
Fix the story.
It wasn't plausible from the beginning. Instead of backtracking, we try to find a way around impassable obstacles. And the whole culture reinforces it now. You know, there is this series on Netflix, Black Mirror, cinematographically very well done, but it reinforces such a screwed up understanding of what's going on. The notion that consciousness can be manufactured if you just construct a computer in just the right way, and that you can download your consciousness onto a silicon substrate. I mean, this is absurd. It is stupid beyond measure. But we live in a culture in which people who say that this is what can be done, they have PhDs to their names. We have elevated stupidity to the degree of a fine art that requires 20 years of study. And this is incredibly dangerous, I think. There are people up there with a PhD behind their names who are saying outright bullshit, and that bullshit gets believed by, and this is the most cruel part, by the most educated segment of the population. And this is what is particularly cruel, because the farmer tilling the field, he's closer to truth than a doctor, a lawyer who buys into these incoherent fairy tales and can't make sense of it, but then he or she thinks, yeah, because you probably need 3 PhDs to make sense of this, but I trust them. No, don't trust them. They are deluded. Delusion suffixed by PhD is the worst kind of delusion there is, because it's infectious, because people believe it.
Other people to believe the bullshit.
And that's where we are now today, unfortunately.
And it seems like all those people are there suffering too, they're afraid of dying, and they just cook up ways of how to save themselves by kind of living forever, not like being immortal with God, but being immortal like in a machine. And so they have no other path to go to, and well, because they would never come to the idea that they should question their very first step. And it is very difficult, because I mean, it took me 20 years to come to this conclusion, and I was so very much in contact with like the logic and of Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, the whole non-duality thing, and the information was available, but I didn't get it. I still treated it as a puzzle that I have to solve. Never ever did I understand that I got to take the puzzle and just drop it.
Or backtrack to the first step and reevaluate the first step. And then you can go down a different path.
This is actually how I work with the people that come to me. Are you familiar with the term self-enquiry?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, there you go. So that's what I'm doing. I help people to stop trying to solve the riddle in the world of objects, in the mind, in thought, in whatever, but I just ask them, do you know what you are in the first place? Who is the one suffering? Who is the one trying to solve the puzzle? Who is the one who wants to wake up?
The problem is, and I recognize what you're saying, and I have a good friend who, this is what he does, Rupert Spira. The problem is, the narrative is self-reinforcing. So what people end up doing or thinking is, okay, I will do self-inquiry, and I might arrive at a conclusion that contradicts the mainstream cultural narrative. But that conclusion is then perceived as a small little David fighting against a million Goliaths, because it seems that the rest of the world around you considers the story now found out to be true, considers that story flawed, and that you're crazy, or you're gullible, or you're a nut,
you're spiritual,
or you're stupid, because everybody else knows differently. Yep. Everybody else has an argument and empirical evidence and logical reasoning that contradicts what you found out when you did self-inquiry. So it requires a particular strength of personality to even touch on the answer, but then continue to believe it afterwards while living in the world where we are immersed. Maybe a meditator going up the Himalayas can hold on to that because he's not faced with the opposing forces. But I think in our culture, you need an intellectual validation. Look, an intellectual story will never change you, will never improve your life, because it's something rotating here. It doesn't sink into the body. It doesn't make you feel better. But it gives you intellectual permission then to validate your own self-inquiry. And it gives you a fantastic weapon to defend yourself against the attack of the whole culture around you, to defend yourself against the skeptics, the pseudoscientists who are telling you, it's bullshit, I know better, it's a material world and nothing has a meaning and you're going to die, and when you die, you're dead and there is nothing left and nothing ever matters because everything, the universe will come to a heat death, you know, the second law of thermodynamics will make everything, turn everything into a nothing. Yeah, okay. You need a weapon against that. So a lot of what I do has to do with, you know, trying to construct that weapon. Yeah. And telling the story, or telling a story that has nothing to do with self-inquiry, which just, you know, bites the bullet head on. It's okay. People are telling you that the most logical approach and empirically validated is materialism. Well, let's look into that and see if that's really true. Yeah. And you come out of the other end, realizing that materialists either are people who don't understand materialism, and this is 95% of them. 95% of materialists do not understand what materialism entails and implies. Or they are so committed to finding meaning by being better than others that emotionally they would not pursue logic and reason to the very end, because we already know the answer, right? We already know the answer. We know materialism is true, so we don't need to really, you know, split hairs all the way to the end, because they're emotionally committed to being better than everybody else. Because, you know, this person faces the hard facts in the face. You know, he's man enough to say, materialism is right, nothing has meaning, I can live with it, can you? That's how they get their meaning. It's meaning by differentiation. We know in psychology there are at least 5 sources of meaning, only one of which is truth. The others are differentiation or leaving work behind that survives yourself, participate in something bigger than yourself. There's several sources of meaning, and we know from psychology, and that's the theory of fluid compensation, it's the technical term, that when you lose one source of meaning, like knowing what the truth is, when you lose that, you will try to compensate by emphasizing some other, like over-validating yourself as better than other human beings, or closure. Closure is also a source of meaning. Like you say, well, materialism is true, nothing has any importance, everything is for nothing. Well, that seems to be a very meaningless conclusion, leading to meaninglessness, but actually it's not, because if you are the one who arrived at this conclusion, it gives you closure.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is what it is. It's a piece of crap, but at least I know what it is. And that gives you a degree of peace while you're swimming in fiction because you think you got closure. So yeah, it's a complicated story, that of our culture.
Yeah, and there is something that makes us wanna believe that we are safe and stable and, if possible, immortal, or that at least there is something bigger that will kind of save me somehow. So we are making up those stories, and we're great at making up crazy stories, and we're wonderfully able to believe that so much that we fight each other. And well, so there is something missing. Why would we do that? What is missing? Where is the pain, actually, why we are doing this? And to normal people, it is like, I'm mortal and I don't want to be mortal. And I personally believe that somehow they know they should not be mortal. And in my understanding, like, okay, I know this body will dissolve soon, but I don't feel like fear of dying, because I don't even live in a way. I'm everything, you know, I got nothing to lose and I got nothing to gain. And so I believe that somehow, it's just a belief, and the people are in a way connected to, because they are, in my opinion, they are dead. And so they try to solve it within the world, within the stories, and because they have no other means.
I have a couple of anecdotal theories about it. I think we have a very primordial intuition about the annihilation of subjectivity being impossible. Because your subjectivity is the carrier of reality. Your whole reality unfolds in your subjectivity, your ability or your condition of being a subject of experience, that which can experience and does experience things. And what is life and the world and the universe other than experiences in subjectivity, ripples on the lake of subjectivity? And then, of course, when you conceive of the abstraction, subjectivity will end. Something flips in your head to say that, no, this doesn't compute. This cannot be. And guess what? It's entirely true. Indeed, it does not compute. It cannot be. The carrier of reality cannot cease to exist. Where it's going to, where is it disappearing into? Everything unfolds within it. Now, that intuition is right. The problem is the interpretation goes deadly wrong. When that intuition comes, I'm going to die. My subjectivity is going to end. No, that cannot be. Yes, stop there. It cannot be. It's not going to be. It cannot be. It's a wrong thought. It's a self-contradictory thought that violates the essence of nature. It's not going to happen. But we translate that into fear. Like, well, but I know it is going to happen because I believe the story. And at the same time, my gut is telling me it cannot be, and then panic, because you're fighting impossible war against yourself or against what is. So that's my first theory. And the other theory is understanding what's going on intellectually It's pretty comfortable. It's not complicated. It's fairly easy. It becomes self-evident after a little while. But really internalizing it is a whole other story. When that conceptual understanding descends from your mind into your emotional body, so to say, the truth translates into what I like to call the vertigo of eternity. And I cannot describe it better. When your understanding of what's going on really sinks in and you really grok what is going on, it's like, your immediate reaction is to back away from that because of the vertigo of eternity. Like Nietzsche said, you know, stare long enough into the abyss and the abyss stares back at you. And I think there is an innate fear of really grokking what's going on, a natural one almost that will motivate us to figure out stories that...
because it seems like the one, the entity that is trying to solve the riddle realizes I have to die to solve the riddle. If I understand this fully, I end being something. I die. And that's why they don't want to touch upon this. And so often I get this question, but what? I'm afraid to wake up because I don't know how will be, if there will be fear and confusion and my human being won't be able to work anymore. And it's so like, no, nothing. It's simple. It's normal. And you are already what you're looking for. Nothing happens.
Never work differently.
If anything at all, your life gets more simple as a human being and everything just quiets and like the whole mess of neurotic constructions can end. Your life just becomes better. There is peace. That is end of suffering.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Sascha. I suffer still. I probably have abandoned several potential sources of suffering, so I suffer less. But I still do suffer, even though my understanding of truth is probably very much the same as yours.
So now that's very interesting for me, because of course we all have the ideal of the Buddha that didn't suffer anymore. But what does that mean? I mean, he was still breathing, he was eating, he had to pee. And I guarantee when he stepped into a thorn, there was pain. And so it's like pain is part of reality, of how things are, like just like breathing. And the question to me, and from my own experience, of course, I'm a human being. I have family. I have an autistic son, and I have a dog, and I have 2 houses and stuff, and I'm working, and it's life. And I get sick, and I don't know what. Yeah. So there is good times and bad times. But I remember the time before waking up, and I said it's something very simple. And before, I did not know reality. I did not know what I am. So that the suffering I'm talking about is an existential suffering. And now, wherever I go, whatever happens, I know I am beyond this human being. And this human being is just like a ripple in me. And the pain and the confusion and maybe even thoughts and everything is just part of it. So there is pain, but there is no suffering. And maybe it's the same with you. I don't know.
There is suffering still, pain, of course, but there is suffering. I think it's undoubtedly less than what it would have been if I still were, entertaining those little narratives. But to some extent, I may be wrong. You know better because you are at a place through introspection that I haven't reached, and maybe not even trying to reach. But as far as I see from my limited point of view, there is an amount of suffering that seems to be inherent to life, not only physical pain, but an amount of suffering. If you lose a loved one, even if you understand what's going on and you know that your loved one is just now in the walls, in the sky, and then in the soils, everywhere, you cannot escape your loved one, the living presence of that process of nature that was going on before is still something we feel the absence of, or at least I certainly feel. Absolutely. There is something about the fear of death that remains. It's not the fear of annihilation, that's gone. But now the oldest fear of mankind is back on the table, which is how will the experience be? Know what I mean? Because if your subjectivity endures, Bernardo Kastrup is going to be dead in the same way that my dream avatar is dead the moment I wake up. I don't mourn the death of my dream avatar when I wake up in the morning. So that's not a problem anymore. I don't have this issue with annihilation anymore. Yeah. But how will the waking world look like after the fundamental change in the configuration of consciousness that we call death? So there is an element of unknown there. And we have some models that we can try, models of death, like psychedelic trances. And now we know for the last 9 years that psychedelics only massively reduce brain activity. They don't increase brain activity anywhere.
Reduce the filters,
in particular, psychedelics decimate a particular mental process called the default mode network, which gives you a sense of personal identity. So a psychedelic trip is a fantastic model of death from an experiential perspective, because it's safe and it's so vivid. It really shows you what it is like. And it can go great or it can go terribly in terms of how it feels. And ego death is a difficult experience for most people. Not after a while, like I don't have a problem with it anymore. My problem now is coming back. But there is a potential for suffering now, even beyond the grave, which I can understand if some people fear. I do. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just
no. I'm very happy with this conversation. Wonderful. It's just me. It's Sascha. I'm just nobody. Yeah, and I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I'm just the individual is so happy that I got rid of confusion.
That's a big
just that. That's it. And it's like I'm now on the planet, and to enjoy myself. I mean, I'm alive. Let's do something with it. It's wonderful. And like the fear of death that you mentioned, I realized, to me, the question ceases to exist. It just doesn't come up anymore. I don't care. It's like I know that I know nothing. And because I know this, the questions are not arising any longer. But then I know from those states, like enlightenment states, like perfect oneness with everything, like felt states of oneness. So I know that as a human being, there are states, and the state can be from entirely non-enlightened, lost in the story of I am an object that will die, and on the very other side, perfect oneness with everything, no center inside or outside, and perfect and absolute conscious awareness and all that. I was everywhere. I know it. And nowadays, as a human being, I'm somewhere in the middle. And it makes no difference. It just makes no difference because it just ripples on the ocean. It doesn't matter how they look. So if this, it's like, I'm talking. It doesn't feel like it's me talking. Words just appear. They belong to nobody. It's not like I feel like I'm an entity. And even if there is a feeling of entity, that too just arises and belongs to nobody. It belongs to everything. So
I can relate to this. And there is a compulsion in our whole culture about control. We want to be in control because we fear that if we are not in control, we may cease to exist. And that compulsion towards control is very taxing. It spends all of your energy and more. It monopolizes your life. It's a constant struggle, a constant fight, because you are never in control. There is always something, always something. And seeing through the illusion of that fight for control does alleviate things a lot, because suddenly you don't struggle in that way anymore. And I don't struggle in that way anymore. There was a point in my life in which I just surrendered. That when I realized that not only was I not in control, I was never, ever in control. Yeah. And I fundamentally cannot ever be, because what I think of as myself doesn't even exist. It's a particular configuration of something. So how can a non-existing entity control anything through free will? Yeah, which is the other big genie in the bottle. And I think most people struggle with that, because they always have the story that, no, if only they achieve the next thing, then it will be okay. Well, guess what? When you achieve that next thing, there is the next thing after that. And it's a ghost. When you finally get there, you run your fingers through it and there's nothing there. It's just air. So accepting to be an instrument of nature and sort of not even telling yourself what I'm going to do in 5 years from now. It's like, well, life will take me somewhere. That doesn't mean that you will become lazy, that I will not take responsibility for playing my part.
Not at all.
I would just not take ownership of the outcome.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing. There is something that wants to come into existence through you, what you call you. Nature wants to manifest in one way or another through you. So you can cooperate with that by allowing it to have the energy it needs to have, by not swimming against the current, just going along with it, playing the part as an instrument. But if you now try to own the result and say, all of this will only be good if the result is that. If all goes to hell, if I don't get what I want to get, if I don't become a famous author that sells 2 million books a year, then it will have been all for nothing. Well, that is the thought that is devastating. That's the thought that's not only wrong, but it is devastating, because it's based on the presumption of personal control, and that we don't have. We are part of nature.
That you are somebody.
That can control an outcome.
Yeah. And in a way, I always say, it's like I'm looking through two eyes. One eye is like the one who believes or plays along with this reality and this society and all the crazy stuff that is going on. And the one that steps aside when a car comes and takes responsibility for things, like a family and whatever. And there is the other eye that sees reality only, and it's at the same time. So it's just like levels, and I see all those levels at the same time. And because I am reality, it makes no difference whether I play along. It doesn't matter whether anybody knows what I do or who I am. It just doesn't matter, makes no difference.
It's irrelevant, yeah.
And in a way, why I'm talking to you today is like, in my reality, those people who come to me, they are like already in the spiritual realm somehow, and they know something about Buddhism and the end of suffering, and they heard of Enlightenment, and it's so like, but imagine a world where what you are writing will be part of the school books, will be just be common knowledge. And it's like, remember the good old times where people believed in materialism. My goodness, yeah. And we did beat them with their own weapons. And it was so easy, but it needed a tipping point, yeah. It's just like back then in the Middle Ages, when they still believed that the sun is revolving around the world, or the earth is flat and so on. I mean, of course they had to believe it then. but now we laugh of the idea. So I realize I'm in a niche, and in a way, to those people I'm talking to, I have to speak their language, the spiritual language. And in a way, I would prefer to teach at the school. I said, no, like it's scientific. You just do it and you'll see.
We have to meet people where they are. There is no way around it. I mean, I myself, and I wrote a book or two about it, I see pure reason, pure logic as a fairly small faculty of the human psyche. The human psyche is a much more complete, nuanced, rich thing than the ability to think linearly according to logical axioms.
Doesn't like that.
There is much more to us than just that. But we are in a culture which requires always logic validation for anything. If you cannot have a coherent, reason-based story, preferably backed up by undeniable, non-anecdotal evidence, if you don't have that, then whatever you're saying is not true. So we sort of amputated large segments of what we are by making this move, by privileging a logic above all else. But yet I play the game purely according to logic and reason, because
yes, you have to.
You have to fight the duel with the weapons you're given.
I don't, but you have to.
Yeah, sure. There are three avenues to knowledge. One is introspection, self-inquiry in your language. The second is observation, empirical evidence. And the third is reasoning.
Yes.
So I focus on the latter two, empirical evidence and reasoning. But I am fully aware that by winning the game according to the latter two, and if I don't win, I don't care, so long as I do my part. I don't own the result. I only need to play my part. But if we win that, then our culture would give validation to introspection. And only then will things really change. When you know the truth by acquaintance and not by indirect reasoning through concept, that doesn't change lives.
Yes. And that's what I understand. Like, I will never, ever be able to reach as many people as I would like to, because only those find me that have a filter on. And I just realized, like, what you're doing there, and you're not the only one by far, like Donald Hoffman, and there's so many scientists nowadays, and they are accumulating proof and reasoning, and one day, and who cares how long it takes? But it's going on, and I'm so happy to see that something that started 2,500 years ago. If that day arrives, where people want to read what you're writing and others like yours, it will change everything.
It's happening. We started a foundation this year, Essentia Foundation, bringing together Donald Hoffman and all these other people that you're probably thinking, and their evidence and their studies, their laboratory results, their logical argumentation about their point of view. And we are injecting a fair amount of resources to make this known, to communicate to the common person on the street things that science knows, but in only very niche groups, like what's going on in foundations of physics today, what we know experimentally today, because of the results of the past 40 years, outright contradicts materialism completely. It's not on the table. There is only one hypothesis that can save materialism. And that's the hypothesis that every fraction of a femtosecond, countless new material universes are being born, for which we have exactly zero empirical evidence. So you either have to buy into this absurdity I just described, or you have to recognize that matter does not have standalone existence. It is just the appearance, the image of a deeper reality that is itself not material. That's the unavoidable conclusion of a little over 40 years, you have to recognize that matter does not have standalone existence. It is just the appearance, the image of a deeper reality that is itself not material. That's the unavoidable conclusion. The kind of experiment I'm alluding to began in 1979 in France with the group of Alain Aspect. And it has culminated in 2018. Well, 2015 here in the Netherlands, and then 2018 in an international group. And now it's like, okay, now there is no way out of this conclusion. Matter has no standalone reality. Now, how many people outside that small, highly specialized community of foundations of physics is aware of this? Why is the media not divulging this and allowing people to really recognize the implications? Instead, what we say is that, oh no, this is quantum woo, this is new age nonsense. We have heard this, since the 60s, all this cosmic consciousness nonsense. Well, words have acquired a sort of a load of prejudice, a load of bad associations.
Yes.
But the results are what they are, regardless of whether our culture has bad associations with some conclusions or not. Laboratory experiments are just consistent. Every time you perform the experiments, doesn't matter where in the world, by which group, the results are consistent and you cannot escape the implications. So we started the Theessentia Foundation to sort of divulge this more broadly to the culture. And the hope, of course, is that in 20 or 30 years, nobody will reject a direct insight through self-inquiry because it doesn't meet the criteria of the little story of materialism. I think there will be a generation, maybe in this century still, that will look back and think in astonishment, like, how could those guys be so bloody wrong for so long? This will happen.
Yeah, I believe it will. It seems to be what's going on. That's what evolution wants to get to. And I'm happy to play my part in it. And, just to me, as you know, nothing's happening. Ultimately, nothing's changing.
Nothing ever happens, but that's something you cannot explain.
No, you cannot.
I tried it in a book, and I think I made some progress there. But you can never really get to the X on the map by talking. Most people say, you're obviously wrong. Things are happening all the time. Yes, I can. From that point of view, of course, things are happening all the time. But there is another perspective from which nothing ever happens, because time itself doesn't pass. But okay, it will take more than a century for this to be well understood, I think.
And I realized, I'm trying, I'm really honestly, I love it to try to articulate clearly what I experience. But I'm aware that every single word must be wrong because it's a word. And it's even worse what arrives at some other person then communicated through words. And still, in the end, what I want people to do is to do the self-inquiry, because I know for certain that when they do it long enough and deep enough and get to the tilting point, they will know themselves. But even then, the interpretation of their what they see then can be totally wrong. They can make up anything they want. So I see that also the mind should get some help in this, because either it was the devil or it was Jesus or whatever. I just got psychotic. And it's so sad. And they need guidance, and that would be the work you're doing, because that would be like the official guidance. So you know exactly what's going on, and all those states and beyond states that you will experience, or whatever you want to call it, makes sense. It makes sense. It's logical.
Historically, we have always dressed insights into the clothing of mythical language. We transform that into a narrative. I don't think that is invalid. I think it's okay. I mean, words can never capture what's really going on because words arose as a cognitive tool developed by monkeys in a little planet on the periphery of an unremarkable galaxy. So what would make us believe that those monkeys would have evolved the cognitive apparatus required for you to really grasp what's going on? No, no, words can never grasp it. But they can point. So I wouldn't agree with people who have an insight and they realize that words can never do justice to the insight, and then they shut up forever. I wouldn't agree with that. I think this is quitting, and you have a moral responsibility not to quit, particularly when you have that insight. I think we can point, but the important thing is that everybody has the shared understanding that when words are said, they are myths. In other words, they are metaphors. They are not literally what is meant. They are just trying to point to it, to show you, point your gaze to a certain direction and give you a metaphorical hint so it's easier to grasp. But we have this myth now of literal truth. Since the Enlightenment, for the past 400 years, we have developed this separation, this sort of epistemic dualism between what is literally true and what is only metaphorically or symbolically true. Well, it didn't exist before. Every truth was symbolic, was metaphoric.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Because at the bottom of it, nothing ever happens.
Yes.
So there is no escape. You're always talking through metaphors. But we lost sight of that. And now we have this,
honest, yeah.
Yeah. And now we have this thing of, well, I believe you, but do you mean it literally? Because what I need is really the literal thing.
Yep.
Well, sorry, buddy. You're never going to get there.
Yeah.
You can never have the literal thing told you in words and be accurate at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a funny condition we are in, isn't it? It would be comical if it weren't tragic.
Yes. And then again, I mean, in a way, I don't care because, I don't see any suffering beings. I don't see anybody bound and nobody to liberate. So in a way, it makes no difference because everything's perfect already. And of course, then the human being is inside like the story of evolution and whatever this is. And I'm there already, so let's go for it. Do it. Yeah.
Here, I'm still not able to go with you all the way in what you just said, and that's of course my own limitation.
Okay.
Suffering exists as an experience. It may be an experience based on delusion, illusion, falsity, but it exists as an experience, and it doesn't feel good, right? People are suffering. And the more you sort of cut through all the conceptual narratives and theoretical abstractions that we mistake for reality, the more you get rid of this baggage, the more I feel empathy. And it's a tricky thing because you start having to sort of protect yourself. Because the amount of suffering going on in the world right now is unspeakable. And it's not new. This has been going on forever. For 3.5 billion years, the story of life, well, that was mostly pain, not suffering. Let's say suffering has been going on for at least 50,000 years when the human being became capable of symbolic thinking and became capable of regretting the past or being angry about the past and fearing the future. The moment that happened, the fall of man, that's when suffering began.
Creating dualism.
Yeah. So let's assume conservatively that this began 50,000 years ago. Still, the amount of suffering is mind-boggling, and the amount of pain. I still cannot see it the way you see, like everything's okay. I know that at the bottom level, everything's okay. This is God doing this to himself, And when you wake up from a nightmare, although you suffer during the nightmare, it's all okay. You're not going to go, oh my God, I suffered during my nightmare. It was just a nightmare. Everything's all right. So I know that. But I do not live according to this knowledge. It's still conceptual for me. So for instance, I don't watch the news on TV anymore because I
Oh,
have no control.
neither would I. My
There it comes
goodness. I
again.
have no radio, I read no newspapers, and I have no TV set since, I don't know, 20 years. Of course, I wouldn't do that.
It's been 10 years for me, half the time, because I know control is an illusion, but I don't want to volunteer exposure to things that would trigger my empathy and make me suffer to the point that I may not be functional anymore. I will be helping no one by empathizing with the suffering of all Bangladeshis, all Syrians. I'll just go nuts.
I was there.
So I do protect myself.
That was part of my journey, that I saw the suffering in the world, and it made me depressive. I was depressed for over 10 years, deeply depressed. At one time, even trying to kill myself. I was in such a bad state, and it was an accumulation of everything. Like if you're really feeling lost already, then you just find more stuff to take you down. And the amount of suffering then, and the cruelty of the humans and all this, I mean, it was just too much. I couldn't bear it. And today it is like, as I said, I got those two point of views. There is the human being in this world. And I'm not sitting on the top of a mountain or in a cave. I'm really part of this world. I have work and I have people around me. I have family. And nobody ever from the outside would recognize that something's strange about me. Never. I'm just a regular guy. So I'm there. And if I see somebody suffering, I have empathy, and there is pain in me too. And it's sweet in a way. And so on the other hand, it's like, in a way, as if, I'm like in a, how do you say, a dream within which you become conscious. A lucid dream. And at the same time, I know this is just a dream, and there's so much suffering, but it is, in a way, it's not real. It's real and not real at the same time.
It's real as an experience, although it's an illusory experience.
There, who is experiencing the pain? And there is no one. There is, even pain and suffering are in themselves just ripples and other ripples, more ripples. But there is no one to experience the suffering.
No individual one.
Now, to me, there is no individual. Like that's like what the Buddha meant by the self. And then there is another wave, the wave of the idea of selfhood, of entity. And besides, there is the wave of suffering or pain. And to me, they're just simultaneously arising, and now one is causing the other. And so in a way, yes, there is the experience of suffering. There is the experience of being a self, an entity. And to me, this is just like how reality presents itself, but not as, well, there is reality that creates a being, and the being then creates pain and wanting and not wanting, and out of this comes suffering. It's like not really, to me, like a chain that is stacking on each other, but it's like all simultaneously happening, and everything, all of this is just an appearance, and it's empty, as you would say in Buddhism.
It's empty, ontologically speaking. It's empty of true substance. But I'm not doing this to contradict you. It's just to share my perspective. Yes, I still see suffering as real, as an experience. It may be an unjustified experience, an unnecessary experience, an illusory experience, but a pungent and very real experience, and nonetheless.
Yes.
And I do pass value judgments on nature because of it. I get pissed off rather regularly that, okay, how can nature allow for this or do this? And of course, I know the answer. Nature is not self-reflective like we are. And it's not like there is an all-knowing God that is self-reflective and self-aware and has devised this plan of suffering for us to go through for no reason because God already knows everything. No, that's not how I see things. I see the mind that underlies all nature as being not a premeditated one, not a self-reflective one. It doesn't have a plan. It's unfolding instinctively, and that leads to suffering. But we are not only instinctive anymore. We are also instinctive, but we have evolved the ability to self-reflect and to pass value judgments, to look at what's happening in nature and say, this is good and that's not good, or this is welcome and that's not welcome. And of course, it's all natural. It's not all the unfolding of nature, but there is a little part of nature. There are some eyes, natural eyes, through which nature can look at itself and pass a value judgment, a preference judgment. Like, if I really knew everything, I wouldn't let that happen. And I think those eyes are ours. So I allow myself to pass value judgment in nature, and I get pretty pissed off. And I'm with Jung in that regard. Jung, in his book Answer to Job, in which he says, man can pass judgment on God because we have the ability to introspect and self-reflect, while God is instinctive. The God of the Old Testament is a very instinctive God. And I am often, maybe too regularly, I revolt at things that happen.
I get that. I absolutely do. And it makes so much sense. And of course, of course, I could now say something like, to me, what is happening to humanity over those last, 10,000 years is, to me, just like the adolescence of a human, where there is instability, you make mistakes, you do drugs and you do alcohol and all this, you are inflicting pain on yourself because you're not anymore part of like your tribe or your family, and you're trying to become an adult and stand on you psychologically, and cognitively on your own feet, and there is this in between where there is turmoil. And to me, this is this is how I see society. And to me, this is like the pain that we are afflicting on ourselves and on nature. To me, is kind of makes sense. Even necessary. I get it. Yeah, of course, you're like 16 and life is difficult for you, and you make so much weird things, and you hate everybody, and it's like, okay, makes sense. To me, I feel like 10,000 years old, and I go like, oh yeah, I see that. I know what you're going through. Don't you worry. Let's talk again in 2,000 years. That's how I feel. So I got a weird positive attitude if I look at the amount of suffering there. But then if something would happen to my son or my wife.
There you go.
Even then, the one eye, the human eye, would be pissed, would be angry, would be sad. And all you expect from a human being. And I know for certain the other eye is always there. I cannot, but being the one, and all this is one. So it will dampen in a way, or at least, again, like as if it would be a dream. I know this is not the absolute reality. And it's okay that my human being is suffering or even doing something, I don't know, crazy. Why not? It's perfectly okay to be human.
And it's unavoidable.
Yes, it is unavoidable. Absolutely.
Yeah. The history of life on this universe, as far as we know, has been pushing towards this for 3.5 billion years. An unfathomable pain and suffering has been invested in bringing us to this point. I don't think the ideal world is a world without suffering. I don't think that for a minute, because I know from personal experience that the deepest, most valuable insights one can get in life are consistently triggered by suffering.
Oh, that's really
Almost,
true.
if not 100% of
Yes.
the times. If you're not suffering, you will be an Epicurean. You will glide through the wave of life, enjoying your time, and one day it will switch off, and no insight, no
Yeah.
growth, no understanding, no self-understanding. So suffering has
No
an important
growing.
role to play. It has to make you uncomfortable for you to start asking the bigger questions.
Yes.
If you're perfectly comfortable, you become almost unconscious in the sense that you don't self-reflect anymore. You go like a drone through life,
Yeah.
just enjoying. Um, but I do revolt against levels of suffering that seem pointless.
Oh, they are
Suffering that ends in
pointless.
death and therefore no insight, just
Yeah.
growing anger.
I know. I know.
Uh, and it's not only amongst humans. I quote this example often, Sascha. There was a documentary, animal life documentary about life in the savannas of Africa, and there was this sequence in which a pride of lions sort of isolated a grown elephant, and managed to bring this elephant down and started eating this elephant from the quarters upwards. And they were eating this elephant for 6 hours before the elephant passed out.
Yeah.
So the elephant was alive
Yeah.
for 6 hours with his butt and hind legs being consumed by a whole pride of lions.
Yeah.
And you don't need to go to the savannah in Africa. I mean, look at your backyard, earthworms being cut to pieces by ants every day, especially in the spring. And there is a part of me who goes like, to which insight is this leading? When a 4-year-old boy drowns running away from Syria with his parents, trying to get somewhere else, which insight? What is this serving? And yeah, I'm pissed off at nature still.
No, but that's I see what you're saying, and again, I mean, I really was at the bottom because of all the suffering I could not bear. And I believe the honest answer would be that nowadays I don't question the plan of God or nature or whatever. I just don't question it. I don't know why, but I know for certain that as a human being, I will never, ever able to understand whether there is a plan or not or whatever. I just dropped the question, it was not a decision to drop the question. It just doesn't arise anymore. Yeah. So in a way, one could say that's why I am very seldom suffering from this, but because something within me is okay and says, well, it is as it is. Yeah. Who am I to say yes or no?
I can relate a bit to that. Look, don't get me wrong. When I asked the question to what purpose does a death of a boy serve, that was a rhetorical question.
Of course.
I don't think there is a plan or a thought through plan. I think
but it
nature
triggers
is
you.
just what it is. It's just unfolding instinctively. Nature is minded, and that mind is doing what it's doing because it is what it is. And there isn't a premeditated thought through plan. It's going somewhere through instinct because we know if it's getting better or not. And we know if we are more comfortable or less comfortable or more fulfilled or less fulfilled. So it is going somewhere, but it's pushed from behind. It's not pulled from the front. Yeah. So no, that question I asked was entirely rhetorical. I don't think there is a premeditated plan, but I think we as self-reflective illusory entities, illusory agencies, we are unique in nature for our ability to self-reflect and think, okay, is this serving any purpose or not? So I'm not trying to find out God's purpose. I'm sticking to ourselves. I think because we have the capability to pass a value judgment, to observe things, self-reflect on them, and then say, okay, this has a point or this doesn't have a point, this is suffering for nothing. Because we are unique in having that capability, I think that imbues us with the moral responsibility to pass that judgment and act accordingly.
I see what you're saying, and especially now in like my Corona times and like wow, there's so much going on, people fighting each other for their ideas. And I was asked very often, why don't you fight? And I said, perfect. I love it if somebody other fights for this topic. I am the one that is sharing self-inquiry and the end of suffering. It's what I'm good at. That's what I really understand there. That's where I know I can really make a difference and help.
Yeah.
So I totally try to concentrate my energy on doing that.
Yeah, I do the same. I do the same. And it was a process for me to accept what nature wants to do through me and be in peace with it, as opposed to imposing my own story about who I should be and what I should do. And this is very recent. I until last year, I was working in the high-tech corporate world full time. You know, I've done a bunch of things in that world, from inventions to mega acquisitions, and that was what I was supposed to do in the first half of my life, the first phase of my life. And I learned much from that, and I'm happy with my contributions and with my payment, the learnings I had from it. But nature wants to do something else through me now, and accepting that change is difficult because it entails abandoning a whole identity structure. You know, Bernardo, the corporate strategist who did $3 billion M&A deals and created this and that technology that is in your mobile phone today, all that identity structure had to just be left behind.
And you become a servant.
Yeah, and accepting that has been a learning. I think now I'm not an amateur anymore. Now I'm okay with it. I can abandon the current identity structure very easily if it comes to that.
But it's a process. It must be a process, because I was searching for 20 years and now I am awake for 15 years. And I mean, you know, it's a life. And I was a baby once. And I'm here now, and there's so much happening in between, and soon I will dead. And it's a process. As a human being, it must be a process. And of course, I, as a human being, I'm learning every day.
And that's what I meant to say when you said, you know, I do my part. I agree fully. And for me, it has been a learning to accept, to simply do my part. You know what I mean? And not go and become a revolutionary who's trying to change the world. No, if you're quiet and if you really feel your emotional body, you know exactly what you're supposed to do. We don't see it because we pollute it with all kinds of nonsense. But if you just stop, what do I really want to do? There is the answer. That's how nature wants to manifest through you. And so it has been a learning to accept that for me.
How sad would it be if you would try to do everything at the same time?
You would be ineffective and dysfunctional. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And to me as a personality, it is almost unbearable to be unfair. You know, like helping this one, not helping that one. But I have to concentrate my energy.
Oh yeah, that problem I don't have.
I'm confronted with human beings, you know, directly. And like, there's like, okay, how can I serve everybody?
Yeah, no, that problem I don't have. It's interesting how we have these unique distinctions, right? I have a problem with suffering. I revolt against suffering, but I don't have a problem with making a choice. I'm very pragmatic about that. For instance, I mean, your audience is not getting to know that side of me because it's an acted side of me, and now I'm not acting. But I can go down pretty hard on some public figures. and outright call them idiots and then explain exactly why they are idiots. And I have done this publicly multiple times. I have a nickname was given to me by academic philosophers. I am the
sledgehammer.
No, I forgot now. I forgot, but something like the angry philosopher or something like this. But I don't struggle with the idea of I'm being unfair to another human being, because I know they are caught up in their own ego, in their own narratives, and and I'm hammering them down. That's unfair. I don't struggle with that, because I know that I'm very pragmatic about the game that is being played. These are the people who will refer to anybody who is in the so-called spiritual path. I don't like the word spirituality. I think it's the worst thing that has ever happened for spirituality is the word spirituality, because it distinguishes it from reality. But anyway, it's people who go after people in the spiritual path and say, oh, they are gullible people, wishful thinkers, they are idiots, they can't accept reason and truth. So I go after these people using their weapons. And I will quarter them in public if I'm given the chance. I will spill blood, no problem. So and you might say, well, isn't that horrible? In a sense, yes, but I'm in tune with what, well, at least I think I am in tune with what I think nature is trying to do through me. And at the level of the cultural game, these people exploit the rational high ground and shoot at everybody else from there. So what I do is I go up the mountain and try to kick them from the rational high ground and shoot at them. And in the process, I can do horrible things to people. And I know I've done. I know there are some people out there really pissed off and hurt by things I did.
See, in a way, that's what I mean. I, as a human being, as a personality, I'm learning. And I stand at a point right now where I realize that I do myself no good trying to serve everybody. And so this is a difficult step for me. And I mean, really difficult step, emotionally difficult, and from a moral point of view and all that. And of course, again, the same time, this is just like, wow. One could call this a pain, and it's a sweet pain. And it just, to me, in a way, I'm just fascinated by what Sascha is going through right now, and I'm curious what will happen next, and will he succeed or not? So
that feeling, I know. But you see, when I say I revolt against certain things that happen, I don't mean by that I think I should be an activist in all those areas and should try to go and save the Syrians right now. I don't mean that, because I know that that's not how I can best serve. That's not the role that nature wants to play through me. I feel it deep in the core of my being. And I would be ineffective if I tried. And therefore, I would not only fail at that, I would fail at what I'm doing now, because I wouldn't give myself the chance to do what I'm doing now. So I don't mean by that I'd have to go and fight every fight. But I think even for the fights we don't fight, it's still our moral responsibility to shake our heads and say, that is not fine.
Oh, maybe that's an interesting point. I guess I see it. It's not just like I'm not interested. I see it, or I feel it. I know what's going out there. I'm aware of the suffering. I'm deeply, deeply aware. And in a way, it's amazing that I'm in a good mood every day. And I'm so happy that I am able to see the suffering and in a way say, it's not in my, as said, I don't question it. I know it is happening because it's happening, and there is something to it. And
I still feel it. There are days I have difficulties getting off bed, because you feel, and the more you sort of get rid of the stories, at least for me, the more I felt it, feeling the weight of the suffering. You sort of pick it up from the collective unconscious. I don't know. And there used to be days that it was difficult to get off bed in the morning. And
that's where I come from.
and play the game. It's less now, but I have had unfair help. I developed a problem in my ears, tinnitus, this constant aggressive ringing in your ears 24 hours a day.
I have a droning.
Oh, mine is more. I used to have a drone for 7 years, but now it's like a high-pitched, varying electric noise, like a dentist's drill in both ears, and it drives you completely bananas. And I take a medicine that helps reduce the volume, and that medicine is a tricyclic antidepressant that has this effect on tinnitus, not recognized by all of medicine yet. It's recent research, but for me, it did help. Thank goodness, it did help a lot. But it is an antidepressant, so I don't feel that thing in the morning that often anymore. But I'm pretty sure if I were not cheating by taking these pills for tinnitus, it would still be a struggle to wake up in the morning and just, feel the weight of the world and still stand up and do your little thing, whatever little thing your life is about. That is, I don't even want to get there in this conversation.
I see. So I'm very happy that you found a crutch, even if it's a crutch, if it helps, and it certainly helps to do your work. That is important work. So perfect.
Yeah, it did help.
I guess what I'm wondering is, like, self-inquiry is something but did you ever really try to practice it, or do you feel like that's what you do anyways?
You are the first one to nail it. Normally, I answer this question by saying I don't do self-inquiry, because I know that what people mean by it is something very specific, some kind of system that you do through discipline a certain time of the day. And I don't do that. But I have always been an incredibly introspective person. From the time I was a child, I was always thinking about what's going on. And I remember being 9 years old. And it was when my sense of personal identity grew for the first time, when it arose, when I got an identity as a person separate from the world. And I remember exactly when that happened, because for 6 months, I was having, every now and then I was having that thought, oh, wait a moment, I am me. I am not the world and the people around me, which is of course not true. But it's the birth of your ego.
Of course.
And I remember having that thought. I would get literally a chill down my spine, going from the neck down to my lower back, like a frozen chill, just running down my spine. And I always used to think about that. Like, oh, what about this? So am I the world then? Because it sounds so absurd that I am not the world, that I get a chill in my spine. and my whole life, I'm just giving you one example, but my whole life was like this. So if you nailed it, I have always done self-inquiry by nature. Nobody had to tell me, if you know what I mean. I can't help.
Yeah, I see, absolutely. And it took me 20 years I did self-inquiry before, but I didn't do it correctly in a way.
No, I certainly don't do it correctly.
So now, okay, that's great to hear. And therefore, I guess in a way, I'm wondering, because you are saying there is still suffering in my life. And you say it in a way that you really say, okay, it seems to be existential. And I'm wondering, why is it seemingly a problem to you? Or in a way, to whom is it a problem, if you get me right?
I don't know if the experiential recognition of the suffering is something different and apart from my pronouncing it a problem. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not a problem, in the sense that I recognize it as simply a part of nature. But so I'm not fighting against that.
Yeah.
I'm not shouting at God saying, "You idiot! You should have done things differently." I know God knows no better, if you know what I mean. We are in the position to know better, not nature. So I'm not. There is a sense in which I accept it because it can't be different. Or even better, I accept it because it's just what is.
Yeah.
But I don't like it.
Oh, neither
And
do
it's
I.
in that sense that I revolt against it. There is still something in me that goes like, darn, I know that that's how it is, but darn.
Of course, but I don't like pain. I don't like pain because I'm a human being. I don't like to feel pain.
But you have a peace about it. You seem to be in peace. You described it several times today. Like, you know, well, there is suffering. I feel it. It's not nice, but there is a level of peace you have with it.
Yes.
I don't have that level of peace.
And I'm wondering, I'm really curious, what's the difference between the two of us? What is the difference? Because I too say I feel pain. Of course I feel pain, but you know, like before waking up, so to say, it was existential. When there was pain, the pain was absolute. And now pain is just a ripple arising. So the ripple is held in the vastness of the ocean that I am. The ripple is still there, but it's not existentially a problem. In contrary to before waking up, I only saw the ripple. And the ripple was everything, and it was absolute. And I wasn't connected to the ocean. So it was really like, I got to do something about it. And now suffering is just a part of life. So,
and when it comes to the suffering of others,
same there.
Is it the same story?
Yes, of course.
I think the difference, I don't see suffering as absolute or separate. So we are on the same page there. I think the difference is that my acceptance of suffering, particularly the suffering of the world, is only here. It's an intellectual acceptance. Like I recognize that this is simply how nature is. It can't help it because it is what it is and it's not something else. But it's not emotional, that acceptance. Emotionally, I'm still in a constant state of revolt with nature.
Would you then say there is still the experience of somebody suffering? You know, is suffering just arising, or is there someone suffering?
I don't recognize individual identity as ultimately true. I think it's an illusion, and it's the illusion within which suffering arises as suffering. But I do recognize the experience of suffering, illusory as it may be, not fundamental as it may be, transitory as it may be, not justified as it may be, but it exists as an experience. And emotionally, I don't really accept the existence of that experience in nature at the levels in which it happens and unfolds. So in a sense, I'm a little piece of nature, very pissed off at the rest of nature for being what it is.
To be honest, I'm really trying to find out whether we are different at all, you know? It may be just an interpretation, and maybe that is just you ripple, that emotional resistance, and that's it then. And it seems to me from all you said that you are not really existentially suffering anymore. Like, you know what you truly are. So maybe it's just words.
I feel it in the body. It's not only semantics.
Okay, but again, when I suffer or have pain, I feel it in the body too, and I feel it emotionally.
Let me give you an example. When I see peoples and animals suffering, let's take an animal because it's less graphic. If you really become aware of how people treat animals around the world, like setting fire on living cats just to watch them, you know, go around running in despair. I have two responses to that. One is empathy. And the impulse, okay, what can I do about it? So I give money to the In the Netherlands, called the Dierenbescherming, the Society for the Protection of Animals. So I do my part. I adopt as many animals as I can. My house is already full, and I give money liberally to that organization. I know I do not have a more direct way to help. It's not my expertise. It's not how I can help better. So one response is the healthy empathy. The other response is becoming very pissed off at nature for being such that this kind of thing can happen. At the levels, it's not an exception. It's not a little thing on the side. It's massive. It's overwhelming. It's all over.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
yeah, it's embodied, and I feel it. It's not semantics.
I see.
I'm pretty pissed off.
And, I mean, to me, it's like dairy industry and meat industries. It's millions and millions of lives just created to be, killed,
tortured and killed, like products. Yeah, we productized life.
But that's not just animal. To me, it's people too. Like the way we are so disconnected from anything that is alive, and we are in a society where doing stuff is important and being is nothing, and it's like so far away from being social. And
but there is a sense in which you found a way to relate to it more or less peacefully.
Absolutely.
And I hope to get there at some point.
Okay, as said, I mean, it's a continuum, and wonderful. Yeah, honestly, I am so grateful as a human being, so grateful, because the amount of suffering I come from is so enormous, and life is good now. Since 15 years, life is good. And that's what I want to share with people. And that's why I'm curious, of course. And
I certainly suffer less now. But my life had a funny trajectory. When I was a kid until 12 years old, there was hardly any suffering. I was, one with life. And then something, big tragedy happened in my life, and then suffering started. Yeah. And then my adaptive self sort of arose. I adapted to circumstances very well, and became very successful in my life as a young adult, professionally very successful, financially very successful, in terms of relationships, quite successful. And then you wake up, and then you realize that you're not in control. What's going on is not what you think is going on.
Nothing
it was all bullshit.
And
then I started suffering more because I was in a kind of, I was blindfolded. I was in some kind of autopilot. I was not even in contact enough with my true self to suffer.
Okay.
Know what I mean? I was on the surface of things.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really explicitly suffering, but then you start waking up to what's actually going on, to what you actually are, to your natural self, as opposed to your adaptive self. And then I began suffering. And it was only after like 10 plus years of that suffering that it started becoming easier. And what I have to thank for it is, to a large extent, the suffering, because it's the suffering that keeps on cutting your own bullshit, keeps on cutting your own narratives, keeps on making you see that every way out you're looking for will go nowhere.
Cannot cheat on yourself. Yeah. And it brought you to where you are now. And it made you do what you're doing. And I know I make the difference. In my lifetime, I will have made a difference for a few people. But I know that what you're creating now out of this suffering might change the lives of millions to come. So
that would be great. But if it doesn't happen, I'm okay too, because so long as I do my part.
You're gonna do it anyway. Yeah. I'm just saying, I'm so happy that you are out there. I'm not alone. So I'm very happy. I'm very
no, you're definitely not alone. Oh no. You know that. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But
it's not like I have people around me, my everyday life, it's just regular people.
But the same with me.
Yeah.
The same with me. But We recognize the others, I'm pretty sure. And they are out there.
They
You
are,
can notice them.
and we're getting more. It's so exciting to be part of it.
It would be great if we can reduce suffering in the world. That would be really great.
It will happen. I mean, as you said, one day the universe will end. But anyways, that's part of that story of this planet, and it will happen. And we will have
wood.
Yeah.
Then I will be more in peace.
Yeah, sure.
The moment we start causing so much suffering to one another, I will be more in peace.
It was very nice talking to you.
I enjoyed it very much as well.